use cases of Web3 through DePIN.
Rover Network turns every driver into a world model builder, capturing real-world 3D data to power autonomous vehicles and spatial AI. Rover, building the world's map together. Grant, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Can you introduce yourself and give a little bit of an elevator pitch about SkySafe?
Yeah, you bet. Great to be here. SkySafe is really about building out airspace awareness around drone activity for all of the different entities that need that. So critical infrastructure, governments, what have you. Really we saw kind of a gap in the market where there wasn't really the ability to monitor drone activity in the same way that we do in commercial aviation. So that's where we come in. We build out networks of drone tracking to provide that critical infrastructure for looking at the drone activity in an area.
And what led you to, what's your background for you to start tackling this problem?
Yeah, well, my co-founders and I were classmates at MIT together. After that, I was an Air Force officer in the U.S. Air Force for 4 years. I worked in the Air Force Research Lab. So a lot of the stuff that we did there was really some of the very early drone work and trying to figure out, how do you use drones in the real world? How do you integrate them into operations alongside manned aviation? And how do you think about the threats that they pose when they show up when you don't want them there? So worked on that in the Air Force for a few years, left the Air Force, came out here to San Diego, where we're located, doing grad school in security and cryptography. And interestingly enough, it's funny how things kind of come full circle. When I was in grad school, part of what I worked on, other than the kind of cybersecurity and cybercrime stuff, was actually some of the early work on Bitcoin and Bitcoin anonymity research. So it's funny, that I've gone away from all the cryptocurrency stuff for a number of years and focusing more on drone stuff, and now we're back thinking about how blockchains can actually help with these problems.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's similar to me, not in terms of the drone side, but I've been playing around with Bitcoin since 2011. And then actually it was just because I learned about this idea of decentralized infrastructure that we call DePIN now, that I also decided to go all in and try to learn as much as I can, become like a sponge and talk to many founders. And it's so cool to talk to great founders like you that are building real valuable projects that also, merge infrastructure and blockchain and crypto. How dangerous is this world that we live in right now? Because I remember back when I was in university, we're playing, trying to build some drones, some like those like Arduinos that you can build yourself. And then we see what's happening, for example, in Ukraine. The war is becoming a drone war, basically, right? Like a robotics war. And
it's kind of interesting. When we first started SkySafe, just about 10 years ago, we actually just celebrated our 10-year anniversary at SkySafe just last week. So when we founded SkySafe, we actually started out on the military side, focusing on, the direct threats of malicious drones and, how do you protect different environments from drones. But as we've evolved over the years, we've seen that drone use, it evolves outside of just, one of the things that I think about a lot is everybody wants to talk about, the bad things of drones, the malicious drones, oh no, drones are going to come and do bad things, which, can be true. But the really exciting thing, the stuff that gets my whole team excited are the good things that we can do with drones. It's, using drones for inspection of critical infrastructure. It's using drones for, photography or drone delivery or, all of these great things. We kind of all see that future vision of what drones could do. And the last thing we want is for a couple of bad actors to ruin that for everybody. I think the crypto world has that same problem, right? Like there's so much opportunity and so much incredible power in blockchain technology, but one or two scammers can kind of ruin it for everybody, right? So when we started SkySafe, we were really focused on the military side, on the battlefield, on that kind of stuff. Our first customers were US DoD. We worked with other allied militaries, but what we saw over time was that, the real power of this wasn't just kind of at the tactical level of, thinking about that immediacy of there's a drone coming in right now, what do we do? It's at the much larger scale level of how do we actually act? How do we build out basically the air traffic control for drones? How do we allow people to use drones in good ways? So that's really where our mission evolved over the years, from kind of that tactical side to now thinking about building out big infrastructure. And, now we focus on how do we build out that awareness? How do we build out, we think about our platform that we've built as drone detection and airspace intelligence. It's providing the information. So that's kind of how we've evolved. And, with that, it means that the market that we address has evolved a lot. When we first started, it was very much that defense side. Now, defense is a small part of it, but outside of that, you've got all sorts of things. So, critical infrastructure, universities, stadiums, airports, prisons. We can talk a lot about prisons. There's drones all over there, border protection, really all kinds of stuff. And I think one of the things that's been fascinating to me as kind of this, this industry has evolved is the amazing use cases that everybody is coming up with. And, that's what has really kind of kept us going over these years and kept us expanding and thinking about how can we do more and do better.
What kind of like business models that excites you, and use cases as well for what came after? Like you said, just stop focusing so much on the wars and like protection and security, and on the other use cases.
Well, one of the interesting things is every time that someone comes up with a new use case for drones, like when we talk to critical infrastructure providers like power companies, oil and gas, stuff like that, one of the interesting things is as soon as you start actually using drones in your own operations, a power company's using them for inspecting their infrastructure, doing all of the kind of maintenance stuff. Once you start having your own drone team and flying your own drones, you start to realize very quickly, like, oh, we need to actually know what else is in the air. We need to know what other drones are around. Like, if I'm running a natural gas plant, it's pretty important that when I look out and I see a drone come into the facility, I have to have that moment of like, wait, is that our drone or is that someone else's drone? And if you don't have the tools and the awareness to actually know the answer to that, it's actually a huge problem. One of the interesting things to me in the drone space is, when drones first came out, I think you would see them as an individual tool being used by an individual operator. So, you have like, say you're an inspector for an insurance company and there's like hail damage to a roof. So you drive out to go see that place. And, I'll never forget the best quote that I heard about this from an insurance company was that a drone, if it's just, one inspector using it, a drone is just a taller ladder, right? It's just the same thing that inspector is using. They has to go to the house. They have to put up the thing. They fly the drone. They do whatever. But what's been really interesting is the evolution of drone technology in the industry. So where we can start having drones running autonomously, we can start having drones actually be staged in an area, in what some in the industry don't love to hear it called as drone in a box. You've got a drone that's pre-stationed somewhere that can actually take off without an operator, without a human actually going there and messing with it. That's the sort of stuff where you start to get the real power. And that's the stuff where you start to get scaling of these abilities. If you can have these drones that are, running and doing these missions autonomously, that are actually, pulling in the data that they need regularly, getting us really valuable data to make decisions on all the time, that's where it becomes super powerful. And you can't do that without the infrastructure to support that. It's I think that's what really excites me. Once you get, instead of the insurance company sending the guy out to the roof with a drone in a briefcase and doing his thing, instead, what if they can have drones flying out there every week, every month, whenever, at a regular basis without an individual doing it? Suddenly you have really good data to work on. And I think in some ways, taking this back to the blockchain world, like a company like Spexy is doing really exciting stuff on that, right? Where you can actually start to think about how can we, do imagery regularly.
Yeah, I know Spexy is a great project. I think I had them in the podcast a few months ago, and also we met them all over Asia in the past few months during Token 2049 and Korea Blockchain Week. Can you explain what is the difference between SkySafe and then Spexy, for example?
Oh, yeah. So we're kind of two pieces of the necessary ecosystem here, right? So Spexy is building out that infrastructure so that you can have these drones that are taking imagery, that are doing these operations over the area. And then what we're doing is we're doing that information of monitoring and assessing drone activity and building the historical data on what drones are flying where, so that when somebody like Spexy or whoever is actually flying those missions, they can make good decisions about, where they should fly, where they shouldn't fly. And also, I think another piece of what we think about when you're talking about building out drone tracking infrastructure is about enforcement and accountability, right? It's one of the problems in the industry right now is that there isn't a lot of accountability. There's rules. There can be rules that say that, hey, nobody should be flying a drone in this particular restricted airspace. But if you don't actually have any enforcement mechanisms, if nobody's watching, if nobody's paying attention, and if nobody's holding anyone accountable, then it's kind of hard to actually make those rules work. I think that's one of the problems that the FAA has had at the moment is, they don't really have the data to go on. So we've been building out the infrastructure to do that. And now with FliteGrid, that's where we're seeing like, okay, we've built this technology. How do we scale it out and how do we make it a real solution for the entire nation, not just for individual areas?
Rover is mapping the world in 3D using LiDAR, GPS, and a global network of drivers. Every mile they drive helps train the technology behind self-driving cars, delivery robots, and next-generation maps. To support open research, Rover shares a free sample of real LiDAR and GPS data. It's a great resource for developers, students, and robotics teams to explore and experiment with real-world mapping. Rover, building the world's map together. Can you explain what FliteGrid is and the idea behind creating this community power component for this SkySafe project?
So what SkySafe has been doing and what we've already done is really, when we started out, it's kind of evolved over the years. It started as, okay, how do we build the sensor technology to track drones and provide that to customers? Then about 4 years ago, we thought about, we kind of understood that it's not just about the sensor, it's about how do you tie that sensor together into a network? How do you gather the data as a whole to give you the full view of what's going on? And so we started to build that out and we shifted our business model from instead of selling a sensor to a customer and, kind of saying, good luck. Instead, we built out the network of sensors and we built it out and then sold it as a service so that, instead of operating like a hardware seller, we're operating like a cell network provider. The same way that AT&T or Verizon or Deutsche Telekom or whoever would build out coverage areas and deploy towers, we do the same thing with drone tracking sensors. So we literally plot out an area that we want to build coverage for. We lease roof space, we work with customers, we actually deploy our sensors across the city, and then we're managing that network in real time, 24/7, making sure it's up, gathering all the data, monitoring all the drone activity, being that kind of air traffic control data sort of provider. Now, when we evolved that, that's that centralized model where you say like, okay, we're going to put up every single tower and we're going to, manage every tower, maintain every single thing. After a while, you start to think like, man, there's got to be a better model where we can really scale this in a way that makes sense and in a way that can really tackle the big problems. And that's where, when I saw the evolution of what the DePIN community had started to build, especially over the last couple of years, where it's really gotten to this point where you can, so many companies have kind of paved the way and built out these models that, we realized very quickly like, oh, we can use this sort of model to help scale, to help provide the data that the entire nation needs and, share some of that work and share some of that reward in the process so that we can actually, really tackle the big problems we're trying to solve. So that's where we're now launching, SkySafe is now launching FliteGrid, which is basically a decentralized drone tracking network. So what we're doing is we've already spent the years building all of the technology on the sensor side, on the wireless side, so that we have all of the know-how to build the sensors and the software to track all these drones. And then the second piece of that, we've already built out the cloud infrastructure to be able to take all this data, fuse it together, build out flight paths and history. And then now we can basically add on the ability to sell those sensors to the DePIN community, have the community deploy them and contribute that data into the network. So the FliteGrid is basically the next evolution of what we're doing to try to enhance and enrich all of the data that we're building about the airspace.
And how would, what's in for the community? Do they need to buy a device? It's like an antenna. It's kind of like, Wingbits is trying to do with the airplanes. What kind of protocol does the drones communicate that they send the information? And what kind of information do they send? Because one question that I have is, like I said, you see someone's drone or a drone like flying around you don't know who it is. But nowadays you can just go to, Walmart and buy a drone that is not necessarily linked to a person. how do you assess this kind of information and know, okay, this is like my drone or some random person's drone?
Yeah. So there's a few questions in there. So first off, kind of, what does it do? How does it work? It's similar to things like HiveMapper, like WingBits, like, all of the GeoNet, et cetera, where, you're basically buying an individual drone tracking sensor, a drone remote ID tracking sensor. You install it on a location that you own, your house, your office, what have you. And then it's basically receiving the signals from all of these drones that are flying. So what we're targeting, at least in this first phase, is basically, so in the drone world, there's a protocol called remote ID, which basically, over the years, it's evolved this question of, how are we going to track the drones? The FAA passed a series of rules that requires that all drones that are flying in the US, with a couple of small exceptions, have to be broadcasting this remote ID signal. And in that signal, there's a couple pieces of information. There's basically the ID of the drone itself, its serial number. Then there's the location of the drone as it's flying, updated frequently. And then there's also the location of the operator, the location of the pilot as they're flying. That one is super important because that's really what gives, authorities or even the general public the ability to actually go talk to the person who's flying, make sure that it's being done safely. And if there's a problem, you actually have someone to go, talk to. I think, that's one of, to me, that's one of the reasons why people see drones sometimes as being a little spooky or a little bit like, oh, I don't know, there's a drone flying around, that's kind of weird, is because you have that separation, that anonymity where somebody's doing something and you're kind of like, who is that? What are they trying to do? Having that public accountability of saying like, hey, here I am, I'm flying completely legally, completely safely. And, if the police need to come talk to me, they can talk to me. Great. I'll show them my registration, whatever. And it's making sure we have that accountability. A lot of people talk about the remote ID standard as being license plates in the sky, right? Which I think is actually a really good analogy because in the same way with, driving on the public roads, we have to have a license plate on our car. We have to have it registered. We have to have insurance. We have to have accountability for our actions on the road because we share that space. The airspace is no different, right? The national airspace is a shared resource that we all as citizens own and share together. So if I'm going to utilize that shared resource, I have to show that I'm following the rules. And there has to be accountability in that. We have to, I don't want people just flying around wherever they want and endangering stuff and endangering manned aviation, endangering the public. So the remote ID standard is really kind of the first step in doing that, in actually adding that accountability. Now, the interesting problem here is, okay, you have the first step. You've passed a law, made a rule, and you've said everyone must broadcast remote ID. Great. Okay. And the FAA spent years working with industry, working with their regulators and all this to get to the point where they passed that rule. That rule went live in March of 2024, but they kind of spent all of their social capital getting the first half of the problem done of making sure that everybody broadcasts, and they didn't really solve the second half of the problem of, okay, now who's listening? Who's going to receive that? Who's going to actually do anything with that data or distribute that data? So that's where SkySafe has stepped in. That's where we've really filled this gap in building out coverage to be able to receive and distribute that data. And now, the next step is, okay, how do we scale that? How do we make that work for the entire nation in the same way that we do for air traffic control currently for manned aviation? And in the same way, we've built out for manned aviation where you have, companies like FlightAware, companies like WingBits that are receiving the manned aviation equivalent. That's called ADS-B. ADS-B gives you that nationwide view of manned air traffic. And remote ID, the goal of it is to give you that identical view of drone traffic. So that's really what we're building out. And I think that, the DePIN model is so incredibly powerful and so incredibly well suited for something like this, where we can really build out a community-driven infrastructure to solve this data problem.
Is the remote ID world protocol, or is it just more in the US?
Yeah, so it's in multiple countries. So the US is one of them. Interestingly, the US wasn't the first. There's two other main ones right now that have very similar remote ID requirements, the EU and Japan. So actually, we're now launching, basically as of when you're hearing this, we're launching FliteGrid pre-orders for the sensor, and we're launching that network in the US. but we're going to be following up in the next year with launches for Japan and EU. Because they too share the same, needs for this infrastructure, the same regulatory environment. And soon after that, there are a number of countries that are kind of in the process of establishing these similar remote ID rules: UK, Australia, Canada, a few others. So as they evolve, the great thing is, we've already built out the technology to do all of this. We've already built out the large-scale data infrastructure to do this. So literally, as soon as a country passes its particular remote ID laws and kind of figures out how they're going to manage the drone infrastructure, we can launch this in that country and actually help provide that infrastructure for them rapidly.
No, man, I'm sold. As a community of SkySafe and FliteGrid, how can I participate? Like, what are the benefits for me as well?
The thing is, it's easy to participate. Number one, it's buy a sensor. So those sensors have gone on pre-order now. So you can go on FliteGrid.io and go pre-order a sensor. We're going to be shipping basically end of Q2 2026. And as soon as those sensors go out, basically you install the sensor wherever it has a clear view of the sky. The higher the better, the clearer the better. And then that connects into our network for FliteGrid, contributing all of the data. And then with that, there's two different things that you get as a community member as kind of the main points. Number one is rewards. So, we're starting out with points, and then we'll be doing a token launch, probably end of 2026, we're targeting. So we'll be rolling over that token launch. So you'll be accumulating rewards, and we can talk a little bit about how that gets calculated and how the rewards are structured, because I know everybody loves that. But then the second cool thing is that the other thing that deploying a sensor gives you is you get to see the drone activity around your location. All of that data that your sensor is contributing to the network, all of the area that your sensor covers, you get to actually see the real-time view of that drone activity. And so I personally think that's super cool, as a drone enthusiast, as an aviation enthusiast. And one of the other things too that I think is cool about that is gaining this visibility with everyone in the community having this view of the airspace. It also adds a little bit of what I would kind of think about as community accountability. If I'm, on my private property and there's someone or some company being a bad actor and doing bad things with drones, like, I can actually see that. I can actually have the data to show that that really happened. And I can publicly talk about that data. And, I can name and shame that company and bring some public accountability. If there's some company rolling out drone delivery and they're breaking the rules, you got to have some accountability to be able to prove that, like, hey, man, that company broke the rules, that they shouldn't do that. Let's, make sure that it's a level playing field. And I think having that, public accountability is super important. So, I would encourage everybody to participate.
Yeah, I love projects that actually, besides, of course, making some passive income with tokens, etc., but actually they give me some benefits other than the Web3 side of things. For example, I have a SkyX on my balcony. I can see the temperature, humidity, wind speed of my home. I have a wing bits, and actually I love, just checking the map. I can see all the planes that are around my home. I can click on them. I can see a picture of the plane. These things it's so cool. So I think for drones as well, and also understand how many drones actually are flying around me, because I have no idea, right?
Yeah, I think, that's one of the eye-opening things. Whenever we show anybody data of our flight tracking across cities, they are blown away by how many drones there are flying all over the place. And we're still early in the use of drones. It's going to go up by orders of magnitude from here. But already, I mean, just in the San Diego area where we're based, we track about 2,000 flights per week. And that's all sorts of things. That's real estate, that's tourists, that's photography, that's, it's also public safety operations. We have some of the, in the San Diego area, Chula Vista is actually a real innovator in drone as a first responder programs with the Chula Vista Police. So they've actually, if anyone is a drone, enthusiast, I would really encourage you to look at what the Chula Vista Police have done, because one of the core things in how they've used drones as a first responder for their police department is they've really used them in a positive way to be able to, like, de-escalate situations, make sure there isn't over response by police, make sure that they can really get a view of what's happening in an area before they have officers on scene. They've got some incredible stories that they've shared about that. And and this is just the beginning, right? There's so much here, and there's a surprising amount of drone use that people don't even realize is growing and happening today.
Yeah, I was checking even like in Shenzhen in China. There's a lot of already working food deliveries boxes around the city that actually can order food. They prepare, they ship it, and then they come to this little box where you can get your your food or your mochi. I think that's the future, right? There's a lot of things happening. I do believe that robotics, we're in this pivotal moment that robotics is going to start escalating so much quicker. And I think drones is part of that. With what you guys are building, I want to go back a little bit on tokenomics, but I want to ask first, do you have any major competitors right now?
Well, certainly not in the DePIN space. I think one of the interesting things, what we do at SkySafe, we're kind of ahead of everybody else at the moment, because I think we've seen at these various stages the evolution of what's needed as far as real infrastructure, real data. I think most folks in the drone tracking or in the kind of counter drone space, most of them are kind of in the past. Most of them are still thinking about it as, okay, how do I build the sensor? How do I build a piece of hardware that I can go sell to someone? And, like the stadium and the prison and the whoever, like they're going to be the ones who are going to figure out where to put an antenna. And, when we thought about it, we've really evolved that thought toward, okay, we need to be solving the problems for these, different operators, for these different entities, not just giving them a thing. So most folks are still just trying to sell, a piece of counter drone hardware to the various customers. We were really the innovators in thinking about, okay, how do we do it as a service? How do we build it out at scale? And now we're the innovators again at thinking about, okay, how do we scale this for real to cover everything and every flight everywhere? So that's what, makes me excited about all of this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I know that a lot of our listeners are very interested about the tokenomics, about how would that work? You said initially it's going to be points, and then points going to be TGE, hopefully around end of next year. But you said you could mention a little bit more about that. Like, how are you guys thinking? I know it could be a bit early, but how to reflect the company profit or company growth into the tokenomics?
So there's a few pieces on that. So number one, I think, we've been really fortunate that so many other DePIN projects have already kind of paved the way to show like what are tokenomics that are actually successful and that can be stable and that can build real value over time. So, we're following everyone's lead on what the, kind of current standard of practice is. So, we're going to basically be doing a burn and mint sort of model where, we're going to be all of the, rewards are going to the operators who are putting out these sensors. And then from that, one of the nice things about what SkySafe does is, I think the common challenge around DePIN projects is always the demand side of like, okay, great, we know the DePIN model has this incredible ability to scale supply, but then what are you going to do to sell it? Are there really customers who want this? The great thing about SkySafe is we already have the customers. We've already proven that out on our side. And now the DePIN model is really just supercharging that and giving the ability to scale this. So, we already have contracts with all sorts of different entities, with government entities, with power companies, with state entities, with universities. We already have these contracts to provide the coverage and the data and the awareness. And we already have, the sales team. I kind of skipped over it a little bit, but, in the 10 years of operation of SkySafe, we're a tech startup. We're post Series B. So we've raised just under $50 million from some of the best VCs in the world. So Andreessen Horowitz is actually our number one investor. And have been a great partner and a great supporter of us for years now. So, they're obviously well known in the crypto world as well. So I think we're well positioned in that. But so the tokenomics, right? I think the key thing is we already have revenue flow. We already have the direct ability to monetize that data. So as soon as we've got coverage areas turned on, as soon as they're contributing that data, we can immediately be selling those as subscription to these different customer groups that we cover. And so the way that works is basically the revenue that's generated by the remote ID tracking data from the FliteGrid network, that goes revenue share back to buying and burning tokens on the market once the token is launched, and basically building the value of the token. So, the more actual real world use of the data, the more valuable and useful the token is. So I'm always super excited about that.
Congratulations, man, on the Series B. I think you guys gonna be, I think, one of the biggest DePIN projects out there in terms of being so far ahead. Because this idea of decentralized infrastructure is quite early, right? We have so many projects that are pre-seed, seed. Some lucky ones are on Series A. I think Helium is the biggest one. I mean, they've been around since 2013, and they deployed the token in 2019. So they've been doing this for a long time. And actually, they're a great company to learn from their mistakes, because they're kind of like paving the way a lot of times that they made a lot of mistakes, I'll say. So you gotta be grateful for their mistakes, so you can learn from that.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say that one of the other things that's really, when I started this journey of thinking about, could SkySafe utilize this DePIN model? Is this a good idea? Should we do this? I think one of the amazing things was, I got connected to the CEOs of a lot of these different DePIN projects. And really over the last year, I've met all these CEOs. I've talked to them. I've heard about their journeys and their mistakes, their, good successes. And I was excited and surprised that all of them were super open, super welcoming. It's such a community vibe that, I could not, we could not possibly be launching this without the help and advice and support and lessons learned of all of the different DePIN projects, all of the different CEOs and folks at those projects, because they've been super welcoming, super open, super honest, and I'm hoping that as we build and as we succeed, I can return the favor as well, because I think there's so much potential in this community as a whole.
Yeah, it's I would say it's a niche, right? I mean, it's niche that's actually growing a lot. When we started in 2020, basically it was Helium and some other older projects like StoreJ. But it's really nice throughout the years going to conferences. I think from now on, you're going to start having to go to like more like Web3 conferences as well to get to know these people in person. And it's a great community. That's why I'm so excited for working with DePIN, for, basically being 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, building this ecosystem and learning. And yeah, I mean, hats to you guys, and welcome to this ecosystem as well, because we need projects like you, projects that are validated on the demand side, have great backers, like you say, 16Z. Anything else would you like to share about the FliteGrid 2026 roadmap for the community to listen and follow up?
Yeah, I think roadmap wise, the big thing, we've got pre-orders launching right now, so that's pretty huge, and I'm really looking forward to kind of building that community out. So if folks want to participate, you can go to FliteGrid.io, pre-order a sensor, sign up for our email list. We'll be launching a Discord server so that we can have everybody involved there. And I'm also really excited about getting input and, advice and thoughts and brainstorming from the community as well. I think as we're building out this network and community, we're not trying to go it alone. I want input from everybody. So, I'm really looking forward to building that community across the board.
Amazing. Grant, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm excited AF for this. I don't want to curse, but my excitement is not small. And I'm definitely going to go after the podcast here, get my own whitelist for the device, because I think what you guys are building is something that has an amazing future, and is also very needed for the future of humankind, because robotics is something that the more you learn, the more scared and more excited you got at the same time. So thank you so much. Have a great day and catch you soon.
Thanks.